Heard rumors that there was more trouble afoot.
I think shelter should be guaranteed. I think food should be guaranteed because, again, we want the capitalist society and all the good things that benefits us. I do like the system of capitalism. I think it's
Okay, so he just argued for the decommodification of the food and housing industry, which I think is based. Just those two policies alone, if enacted in America, would make America like probably the closest to socialism of any country on earth right now. So I think that's cool. I know where this is going to go. I know that they're going to argue. I think one of the things that commies or lefties or whatever do that bothers me a little bit is it seems like they are often very bad at identifying what to be happy about. If people hear Ethan say like, "Oh, I like capitalism. I think it's done good," but then he talks about how he thinks that like you should decommodify essential goods and protect the rights of workers. There's like an underlying set of moral beliefs that Ethan holds which are favorable to us and morally good. You know? I guess what I'm saying is I would take a sincere, heartfelt, genuine social democrat over a LARPy ML any day. Like a billion trillion times over.
good. But so we want all the good things, but at the same time, it does, if it's unchecked, it makes society, the distribution of wealth and like the stability of society goes totally off keel. And if you need a job to provide food and shelter, then again, that's the capitalism, right? So you have to guarantee those things. So I think work, food, and shelter should be guaranteed rights of people.
I'm like a kid. See, it's like mom and dad are over here, and I'm in the middle, and I'm little.
Living in capitalism.
And education.
And
healthcare.
Right, and healthcare should be too, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, those are even like the three most basic, but healthcare, should be, and education should be too, you're right. And it makes sense to me, because you want to exist in this world where it's all about money. It's all about market forces and all this shit. So you can't just regulate on the top. You have to regulate on the bottom too, to control for the outcome.
So yeah, you are...
So far, this all seems based. I don't know like if this is going to go in a negative direction, because this seems quite good, as I understand it.
Everything you just described is almost social democrat to a T. I mean, this is what think like FDR Democrat.
I love his second Bill of Rights.
Yeah, Democrats pre like 1970s is everything that you're describing.
Dude,
at least
I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think this would be closer to social democrats in Europe in like the 1920s. The ones who were generally aligned with the socialists, in some cases, not all. I remember, Luxembourg didn't think that socialism was viable, or at least not presently, but a lot of them were motivated by pretty similar, I guess, ideological inclinations. Yeah, it's pretty extreme for a social democrat. I don't think most social democrats would advocate for like full decommodification of housing, for example, but
theologically, they didn't always live up to all those things, but that was the kind of prevailing wisdom at the time.
The second Bill of Rights would have been the greatest thing that happened to this country, man. That's crazy. Ethan, describe one good thing about capitalism. First of all, I think it's like the natural inclination.
Yeah, wait, hold on. Oh, fuck, dude. Is this whole thing going to be like Hassan's side of the fans being really toxic? If you want to move people over to the left, you do not listen to them go on a spiel about how they want to like do all these great things. And like, okay, but you're still a capitalist. Explain why you should be put up against the wall. Like a 12-year-old type that out.
Of some people, like I don't think it's even realistic to say I want to live in like a perfect communistic society, because that just doesn't work. It's antithetical to human nature. But I do think there are good things of...
I don't like human nature arguments. I think Ethan is wrong there. But, we can continue.
Capitalism provides, which is... I do think there is a sense of innovation that happens when people are motivated by money and pushed to, do certain ideas and to invest in certain ideas that, like, the government isn't doing. I don't hate the idea of, like, people who can be successful. I think it's good that people can achieve success in the term monetary success. I mean, that's what that means, right? I do. There's nothing wrong with that.
I think the right approach to this would just be to hear what he's saying and think, okay, what are his real issues? And is there a way to pitch things correctly to him? For instance, I think you can easily make a case for innovation and success, even within the framework of a socialist society. I think there are easy ways to make that argument. If maybe he doesn't understand, maybe he doesn't he doesn't have a sort of an agreeable understanding of what communism might entail. Maybe in his mind, there would be like genuine problems. But I think a lot of people are really quick to assume malice, I guess.
It's good. I think it's good. Yeah, right. It encourages efficient production, right? I mean, if there's a money incentive, like if everything was owned by the government, it would remove a lot of.
See, like for instance, I don't think communism is being owned by the government. I don't think socialism is everything being owned by the government either. So you can hear that and you can think, okay, so when Ethan thinks of socialism, he thinks of total government control. Now that's not socialism, so then maybe we can like correct misunderstandings. But I have a feeling that he's going to see a bunch of comments and it's going to be people like, you filthy capitalist, like
Efficiency, perhaps, when people aren't motivated by money and stuff. But this is all silly. Again, it all sounds very vapid and when you describe it, because capitalism is inherently, it seems like, based on hedonism, right? It doesn't come from like an altruistic place. So that's why the important part is to make sure that there is altruism and humanity that is kept in this, rat race, which is capitalism.
I disagree with what he's saying, of course.
That's it. The second Bill of Rights, FDR tried to pass, and he was close to, man. The right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health, the right to adequate protection from economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment, the right to a good education. He was going to draft the second Bill of Rights, and it was close. It was really close to passing. He was on some king shit, wasn't he? I think that capitalism is a more realistic system of governance than like fucking communism is. Communism never works because people are inherently corrupt, and whoever's in charge.
Yeah. I Demon Mama, I was just about to say that. Yeah. It seems like a lot of his positions here are in line with common misconceptions. Okay, I have to say, I can't blame Ethan for thinking that communism is when the government controls everything, considering he has to sit there and listen to defenses of China and not defenses of Russia, but I guess like sort of like implicit suggestions of the underlying proletarian value of these societies. Like these are correctable misconceptions.
They're going to be greedy. They're going to be corrupt. They're going to fuck everything up. It doesn't make sense to me that system could work where everybody just acts in good faith and does the right thing. As long as there's no like mega losers in capitalism, if that's something we can regulate, then I do believe that it can be a benevolent thing. Yeah, capitalism breeds greed. Exactly. And, they say greed is good, and there is some truth to that in measure, right? It's, it's an inherent quality of man, and it can sometimes drive innovation, efficiency, all this kinds of stuff,
Vosh, to be fair, he isn't being remotely charitable to communism either, so I don't think it's too unfair if people in his chat are being a bit mean to him in return. No, I completely disagree with that, actually. I don't think he's being uncharitable. I think he misunderstands it. And the difference is, if you want to be a lefty, especially if you want to reach out to like a content creator who's like listening to you right there, like if you want to change people's minds, you can't hear them have misconceptions and then think, oh, this filthy shill. Why not just try to correct them? Be a better example. I think it's pretty obvious from how Ethan is talking here that he's not like an ideological partisan against leftism. He's not speaking the way he is because he has like a motivation or like a bias towards dumping on the left here. He just has beliefs about what communism is that he doesn't like. And I think if you can't identify the difference between those two things, like that's an issue, right? We have to be able to do that.
You think that because you benefit from it, Ethan?
At some point, ignorance is a result of uncharitability. No? Okay, genuine question. Has Hassan ever given like an acceptable definition of socialism and communism while on the show? Like, I know he's talked about stuff like worker rights and progressivism and stuff, but has there been like any active effort to... So Ethan's exposure right now to people on the left, like at like the day this was recorded, this was like right after the whole thing with China and Taiwan, which means that Ethan woke up today and saw a bunch of messages from people in his own community talking about how he's a Westoid shill for believing Taiwan is an independent country. So again, I really don't think reading malice here is acceptable.
Obviously. Yeah. Yes.
Well, his opinion is obviously going to be his opinion based on his experience.
But I feel like that's always been my opinion, frankly. So
I'm just saying the fact that it benefits you is obvious that it's gonna affect your opinion. It is your opinion.
Hassan relitigated the whole thing today with Taiwan.
it just seems like this fucking like socialist communist idea that people want is like
No, this segment. Okay.
just a pipe dream.
What is the idea that people want? I'm kind of curious
Well-
because I see so many people in the chat saying no.
I don't know what y'all are tripping about. Like, what the fuck do you want?
What is the idea
LTake?
that
Are you
people
guys like
are
just-
looking for
I don't know.
to hear?
I actually don't know. Like, it's almost like weird virtue signaling to be like, I'm living in modern day America, but I want a full communist revolution.
I think that was a silly thing that he just said.
I'll take on humanity, dude. You guys are out.
Dan, do you know? Because you know everything.
Yeah, I don't really. Do you really want to get into this right now?
I don't mind.
Oh.
I'm
I don't
actually
really want to
curious.
do it right now. So.
Okay,
Well,
that's
they
fine.
think that like
I'm actually curious what, because like it seems like majority of the chat is disagreeing, and so I
Well,
was
we have
like,
a very left-leaning audience here on the H3 podcast, and I'm sure plenty of people agree with you. I'm sure, but and obviously, the
I
people
think
that
we are left leaning too. so that's fine.
Anti-capitalists are going to speak up when you're giving an impassioned defense of it. But
I wouldn't say it's impassionate, but
Well-
I do defend. I am a capitalist. What do you want? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I
pretty
think
much,
it's.
yeah.
But the thing is, like, they think that like workers should share in the.
yeah, that's the fundamental difference. Is that
Workers should get a percent of your earnings, essentially, a percentage of their production.
Well, more than just a percent of production, a percent of ownership as well.
I don't agree with that. I don't think. I mean, it's
There you go. That's the closest thing I've heard so far to like a real ideological aversion to socialism.
in some cases it's true, but I think you do have a obligation to make sure your employees are well provided for.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like that's for sure. Suck it, chat. You're watching a capitalist pig. Deal with it. You guys are all like radical communists. There's that many radical communists.
they're not radical communists. Not everybody that's anti-capitalist is a communist.
It is kind
by
of a
any-
radical take that being it's like full anti-capitalist. I mean, you're essentially advocating to change the entire structure of all societies today on Earth. That's not radical.
I think I think the problem is like this is kind of fucked from the get-go because with Dan there and with the chat behaving the way it is, it's essentially guaranteed that there's no way to like correct course, right? Like there's no real discussion that can be had here. He's going to be incredibly defensive. I wish I could be there. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Then the chat could like rage about me being an evil Nazi or whatever, and I can like talk about the value of socialist ethics. Did you reach out to him? Yeah, I reached out to him. I just expressed my sympathies for his audience being a bit head-assed. I didn't ask to go on, though, because I'm not one to exploit a disagreement on a show for clout sharking purposes.
Is there
Also-
anywhere in the world that is doing that?
Not really. China's apparently communist, but it's not
No,
really.
it's not.
It's not. The people couldn't do whatever they wanted
North
during
Korea's
COVID.
communist. Well,
Yeah.
not really.
Yeah, that's not really.
Yeah. Russia is, well, what? I don't know what Russia is. No, not really. I don't think there
No.
is.
No.
I don't think there really is. But how is being anti-capitalist not radical? Just in theory. Because how, like,
Because the United States isn't the whole world, dude. Like,
what country is not
I mean,
capitalist?
I'm
Mo-
from
most-
Israel.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad answer. The idea that if you leave the United States, you'll just be swimming in socialists is not true. So capitalism is the dominant ideology worldwide, like pretty clearly.
Israel, but it's
Europe
pretty
has
much the same
large
thing.
Anti-capitalist socialist political parties. Some of them in power at times. Some of them, it's definitely.
They're capitalist countries, bro.
eh,
Name one European country that isn't a capitalist country.
no, yeah, you're right. They're all capitalist countries.
Okay. You know, there's plenty to criticize for modern capitalism.
Oh, for sure, Demo. I just don't like the idea that it's like, bro, hey, Westoid, like, wake up and smell the roses. You know, the idea that, oh, yeah, well, everyone's a capitalist here in the States, but elsewhere, it's like, well, no. They're capitalists over there, too.
It's not working in its current form. It's just totally broken in its current form. Like this late stage capitalism that, like this subreddit, like it's very poignant, I believe, with the late
The Chinese Communist Party is not communist? Question mark, 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 question mark.
stage capitalism. You know, it's not working for sure. But like, name one, you know, social democracies do great in Europe.
Yeah.
Sweden, for example.
Yeah, I'm because you're explaining Sweden pretty much, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Who's this? I don't know this person. Is this the one who was called Ian? This guy has a Swedish flag.
capitalistic country with insanely high social benefits and security.
That's what I
systems.
High
would like to see.
taxes.
That's what I've lived in my whole life,
Mhm.
and I'm curious what these people have to criticize. I mean, there's a lot to
Ask
criticize.
Dan. You have a radical communist right next to you.
I actually don't know what the criticism is for Sweden's economy. So
That's
I'm
exactly
also
what I
for-
would love to see. Like that's
Social democracies have the same basic fundamental problems that America does. You can fix some things with social democracy, but not the fundamentals. You might also notice that the welfare states are being torn apart by the bourgeois class in social democracies. Like, the problem is, every good thing you do under capitalism that benefits the working class has to be done in opposition to the most powerful people in the world. You basically set up a system where the most powerful people in the world want the opposite of the things that you want in a lot of cases, and you have to fight with them every time you want things to improve. And if you ever slip, they start taking ground back. The class dynamic, the dialectic, you know, I mean, this has been going on for millennia, of course. Fundamentally, it's almost the defining characteristic of human civilization is that dialectical process.
what I don't understand why everybody is like that.
And I'm sure there are. I'm not saying there isn't. I'm genuinely curious. I don't know.
I think that
I think that a lot of
Scandinavia.
young people see that capitalism, whether you think it has brought a lot of improvements to people's lives, is a system that is killing the planet, and especially in the last 30 to 40 years, most people, I think, I can really only speak. I'm just going to speak on the United States because that's my experience.
I don't disagree with what he said, but you would need to substantiate it in order to tie it to capitalism. Because I bet Dan wouldn't be willing to acknowledge that the USSR was a capitalist country and the USSR was ecologically ruinous. So, you know, I do believe that capitalism is uniquely and specifically bad for the environment, but it's complicated.
What I've done around is, like you said, you were just talking about that subreddit that's kind of all centered around it. I feel like people see the decline happening and they're fundamentally unhappy with the way that we have arranged our society. And to act like it was eternal and was always like this is kind of naive. I mean, capitalism, well, because capitalism is something that has only existed for about 200 years in like the
Talk to the demon himself, Vosh. Thank you, Mr. Viboten.
form that we know it.
I didn't say it's always been like this. I
Right,
was
but
talking
I'm
about
just
the
saying
best
that, like,
form of
do you
government.
think that we have figured it out, that we've found the best system of organizing society?
I think that
Like, we're at the end of history.
I think part of it you have to tangle with is what's realistic. Like, what's a realistic
Okay,
life
but
for
what-
people to
but-
form?
I feel like if we're
How do you
talking about
define
America,
what is realistic about a society that, I mean, we live in Los Angeles. There's thousands of homeless people starving on the street in our neighborhood.
But I'm not advocating.
I don't like responses like this. The question should be, what do you think is unrealistic about socialism? Like worker control, what element of this do you think is unrealistic? And to work from there. Capitalism didn't create homelessness, of course, though it certainly doesn't help it much.
For that.
Right, but I'm saying that people see the flaws in the system that we currently have, and so that they
I see them too.
And there's a lot of, and this is the thing, you're saying like everybody's a radical communist. That's not necessarily the case. Being anti-capitalist doesn't equate that. It just is somebody that has landed on the side of the coin that they think that the system that we have, that capitalism is not working. And there's a
I agree.
huge
though.
variety of people
I agree
ways
with
that
everything you're
people
saying.
go from that. Well, and
I don't really believe you can be an anti-capitalist without being a socialist. There are some alternatives to capitalism and socialism, but we call those third positionist arguments, and we usually tie those to the fascists. There aren't many. It depends on what you consider to be the defining traits of capitalism, right? Because for me, it's like market economy and the bourgeoisie, you know, private ownership of the means of production. And there are only so many ways you can meaningfully challenge that. So if by anti-capitalist you mean people who think that our current system is bad, that's like 100% of people. Only the most deranged, like Clintonite lunatics would dare question that premise, right? Like everybody is some kind of dissatisfied. But that's not the same as like really being an anti-capitalist, right? As you know, people are always that would be like looking at all the like French peasants in the 14th century and to ask like quite like privately like how many of them have issues with the monarchy, and it's going to be a lot of them. And it's like, well, all of these people are actually Democrats because they reject the monarchy. It's like, well, not really.
some people, I mean, most Republicans, and I would say even a lot of Democrats would say what you just described, that social democrat kind of point of view,
They're not.
would
though.
say that you are anti-capitalist with that point of view.
Then
Because
fine. Then I accept that.
Right.
I mean, say whatever the fuck you
and social
want.
democrats are very often seen as kind of like right on the fence between the what people called the left and the right.
So I'm
which
walking
in
the
most
middle
contexts,
path, like Buddha himself.
right, you're taking the middle path.
Don't you feel though that here in America, like people can't even afford healthcare or
Man, he's dumb. I don't think anybody in this discussion, with the exception of chat, and that's always the case, is being dumb.
education? So like, isn't a social democracy a first step that we should all try to get to?
Yeah, a lot of people do
before
feel that way.
before
I
like
mean,
trying to get to like
There's
I
an
want
enormous
shares in
amount of
every
nuance
business
and
I work at.
degrees here. Yeah.
So I think
100%.
that this
Do you think there's any possibility for something on the spectrum between capitalism and communism? Sure, yeah, market socialism. If we define capitalism primarily by, because obviously when it comes down to like defining an economic system, it's so complicated. But if you take like basically what capitalism is, at least from my framework, how I define it relative to other systems, and again, that's always going to be a subjective process. You have the bourgeois class, and you have the market economy, and you can take away the market economy and just keep the bourgeois class. And now you just have, I don't know, some kind of really weird, like, modern mercantilist system where you have, like, an aristocracy that... You have state capitalism, kind of, but, like, even they had markets. It's... Yeah, I guess state capitalism is the closest you can really get to... I don't know. That's weird. Okay, that's wacky. That's wacky behavior. And you can take away the bourgeoisie while keeping the market economy, and that is definitionally market socialism. If you take away both, you have socialism. You know, I mean... I'm not arrogant enough to believe that I can like fathom all possible systems now and future. Maybe terms change in the future. Maybe we understand things in relation to a different set of parameters. I don't really know, but it seems like it really is kind of like the big three really do seem to be fascism, socialism, and capitalism. That really does seem to be like the dynamic.
I think that it's like for us, we're mostly talking about like what we see as realistic. Like, what's the first step that we should at least try to get? Like the bare minimum. I've been here 7 years. I'm still shocked about healthcare. Like it shocks me every single time I deal with it.
It is shocking.
I paid $200 just to get a blood test. Like it's insane. It's insane. So to me, it's like, yeah, we can talk like philosophical and we can talk all kinds of things, but I feel like what's actually going to happen?
I thought all fascists were capitalists. Fascists employ the capitalist mode of production, but unlike in laissez-faire capitalist societies, the behavior of the capitalist is limited to the interest and political will of the state. Basically, Nazi Germany had business owners, but you know goddamn well that no matter how profitable it might have been, they couldn't start selling, like, you know, menorahs in department stores in Germany. There are like broader... The bourgeois are not the ruling class in fascism. They are a ruling class, but they work side by side with the state, and the state operates as a avatar of a not necessarily totally distinct, but it not entirely same set of interests.
What's something that would be a first step to improve?
Well, I mean, there's a variety of opinions on that, and you know, a lot of people would say that it does need to be an incremental thing, and we need to work towards that. I mean, even people who describe themselves as communists say that, because again, like the USSR, for example, which is the most famous example of like a big country, a big superpower level country that people consider communist, right? Within their own framework, they never thought that they were communist. They thought they were taking steps towards communism, and in a variety of different...
They weren't socialist either.
Different ways. And so it's just about like that's an ideal. That's like an end goal that people who would self-describe as communists are. Now, what I would say a radical communist is somebody that wants a violent revolution to overthrow the government and take over and implement that system as closely as possible now, which is something that has happened in a variety of places to varying degrees of atrocities that fell out of that.
When you say you're an anti-capitalist, though, does that mean that you are critical of capitalism?
You
which
might
I
be too.
am.
I mean, a
I
variety.
think,
am.
I think you say you're a capitalist, but it's a
But I
lot
am,
more
because
nuanced.
I'm not against the idea of capitalism. I think it's a good system with the correct
with a lot of corrections.
Because when you say you're anti-capitalist, it sounds...
In my experience, one of the most effective ways to respond to a person who makes that argument is that the whole battle for social democracy is trying to hold off the incredibly small class of the bourgeoisie from doing their thing. Like, all of social democracy, the whole welfare state, everything, the whole political project is just basically, how do we, like, keep this tiger caged and build things in spite of it? Like, what does social democracy do? Social democracy is marginally more effective in chaining the bourgeoisie. But ultimately, like, you are still aiding and abetting and perpetuating a system in which the most powerful people in the country are ones who will generally want things totally opposed to what the majority of people would benefit from.
It's like you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't believe in capitalism as a governing
What it comes down to
concept.
me too is when you threw out that line from Glenn Ross about greed being good or whatever. I
don't think
accept
that's not from that. That's like a, isn't that like a,
yeah, no,
that's like a
Glenn Ross.
I don't think that's the first time that was written.
Well,
Go ahead. Anyway, regardless.
it's certainly not the first time that people have felt that way, but that line that people often repeat is from that play. But anyways, yeah, I mean, all it comes down to me is that I don't think arranging society based on greed is good for the human spirit, and I think we see the consequences of that.
I think this is a bad argument to make in favor of socialism. People will respond to and try to maximize their own conditions within the material conditions they're born into and live within. I don't think that socialism is about willfully rejecting greed or like living a monastic lifestyle of purity outside of like hedonistic commercial and commodity pursuits. You know, I don't think it's about like rejecting an element of human behavior. People are going to be greedy in capitalism, socialism. It doesn't matter. Like greed is just a part of human behavior, but it responds to incentive structures, like with everything else. So the goal then is, okay, so humans are often greedy. What can we do to build a system that takes that into account and produces the best outcomes? Yeah, exactly, Dude Mama. You know, social democracy is basically like, you know, they proclaim to protect the rights of the people and then grant enormous, unimaginable power to a very, very small number of people who want the opposite of that, and then sort of performatively hold. It really is like the circus master who holds off the tiger or the lion with like a chair and a whip. Like, behold, watch as the benevolent, gracious, and humane social democrat protects us all from this tiger. At the end of the day, like the tiger and the circus master are both part of the same circus. You know, they both pack up and go on the same trip, show up to another group of workers and do the play. I think there shouldn't be a tiger, personally.
All around us.
So
a hyper-capitalistic society like the
greed needs to have bumpers. Okay? Because the idea that we can live in a society without greed is a fairy tale. It just doesn't exist. And you can't approach a practical way of governing a huge body of people without looking at it realistically. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the USSR again, and I mean, it's a catastrophe because the people on the top who rise to the top are the ones that are pathological. They are greedy.
You don't think that happens in our society?
It is, but like...
Well, it does in both because the USSR was state capitalist. In both systems, the USSR's model of capitalism and our own, the governments were controlled by people with a different class interest to the worker. The worker in the Soviet Union had the decisions of their local and federal government made by people with completely different desires and interests. I mean, there wasn't even a thin, flimsy veneer of a democracy in the USSR. I mean, over here in America, this is a democracy. It's a highly flawed one, but you know, it's not like the games are rigged beforehand and like there's no choice, no chance. You know, if there was, then they wouldn't spend so much money trying to influence your vote.
But that's not the antithesis of everything that we stand for.
You think that capitalism does a better job at harnessing
you have to be aware. Say, listen, we live.
Isn't communism the synthesis of capitalism? No, communism is what many predicted to be the logical end result of the resolution of the class dialectic. When there is no longer a bourgeoisie, and for the first time in human history, there is one class, the working class, communism was the system that was presumed would emerge. A dissolution of money and borders and statehood and class distinction, because there would be no distinction, because everyone would be the same class. But it's not really a system. Communism is, well, I wouldn't say it's pie in the sky, but I think it's a little more aspirational. That's why I prefer to talk about socialism. You know, if we talk about commodification, the bourgeoisie as a class, you know, I'd say stick to policy. You can imagine things outside of policy. That's fine and good. But, you know, I don't think the appropriate time to bring them up is when you're trying to bring Ethan Klein over.
In a world where greed is inevitable. And so we need to harness that for the good that it does provide, and we need to put on bumpers for the bad things it does do. Because if we're like, yo, we need communism, and greed is bad, and nobody, you know, everyone is equal, the cycles are going to rise to the top, and they're not going to fucking do what needs to be done. It's just not going to happen. And it's not realistic. People are going to cut. They're not going to live that way. They're not going to live that way. The psychopaths, which there's going to be like 10, 20% are just full-on psychopaths, are the ones that are going to become powerful. And they're going to take advantage of the system. They're going to become our oligarchs. They're going to become
So do you believe that
exploitative.
do you think the United States
There will always be power hungry, highly driven people who are very unconcerned with the well-being of others. But I think that most people would agree that democracy has done a better job filtering out those people than, say, monarchy, right? So you can make the same arguments for economic democracy. Maybe there will be like really bad guys who still rise to the top in, say, a market socialist system. But don't you think it's more likely that managers would be good to the people beneath them if they were voted on by the workers who they have to deal with? Like, generally speaking, just as a like a very baseline procedural, like how do we arrive at leadership? Choosing our leaders seems to be better than leaders being undemocratically appointed or simply taking position by force. So we start with that, that's step one.
with its democracy, like our election system and democracy gives good safeguards, or at least gives some safeguards to preventing the sociopaths like you're talking about that rise up through like a totalitarian system.
That's not even a problem that you can control for. There's no way we're going to keep
You don't think
sociopaths from
having
becoming
like
billionaires.
elections and being a democratic and term limits, or having our president change every 4 years?
Are we
prevents-
talking about like rich people or elected officials?
I'm talking about elected officials. I'm talking about like essentially what I'm asking is, do you think democracy is a good thing, and do you think democracy is what helps prevent?
Yeah,
that from happening?
but obviously our
Okay,
democracy
so-
isn't perfect either.
Well, for one, I think they do a better job than they would an orthodox monkey if they were just like pointed there by a dictator. But for two, a huge part of the reason why people vote in bad candidates is because of corporate run media. But one of the best examples of this is climate change. There is no chance whatsoever, zero chance, that there would be an actual ongoing debate about climate change in the United States were it not for the fact that the corporations involved in its worsening have demonstrated an ungodly amount of power when it comes to lobbying and buying up corporate media and disseminating like fake information. So oftentimes when us dirty proles, when we have bad election results because people vote in the wrong candidates, that's largely because it's not like a real choice. I feel at the very least the choice is being heavily weighed on by the fact that bourgeois interests are in a large sense the ruling interests, and that flows down to everyone. I mean, for God's sake, the idea that tax cuts to the wealthy would trickle down, nobody believed that in the economic sphere. No, seriously, like go back to when that was said and most heavily pushed, Economists were like, what? It was just politicians and their rich buddies saying it, and now to this day, millions and millions and millions of Americans who are poor believe that tax cuts to the wealthy eventually lead to them becoming wealthier. Like, this is very clearly a case of the scale being weighed on by the bourgeoisie, even if it is majority proletarian voting.
Right.
But
you think ultimately that being a democracy, living in a society that votes and has, the people agree on who should represent us and who should lead us is something like that's a better system than like say China, right? Where they have a council of elites and somebody is elected from within, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Reagan knew that trickle-down economics didn't work and was full of shit. Everything that we've learned about the Reagan administration makes it abundantly clear that up until the point where he was kind of lost in the head, like he like was lying through his teeth constantly. Yeah. Literally, so much of the bad decision-making from the proletariat in this country can be traced back to single-digit numbers of, like, ancient, wealthy white men who realized that they could make even more money on their few years left on the planet by just, like, ruining the world in their way. Like, consistently, over and over and over again. This is how, like, you trace back so much shit. This is why, like, there was no gigantic bourgeois conspiracy to pushing Bernie Sanders' popularity when he was advocating for a $15 an hour minimum wage. This is the difference between authentic and inauthentic politics. Bernie Sanders said, hey, shouldn't we be get paid enough to pay our rent? And people like that idea. They don't need corporate media to package and sell it to them. It's a good idea, Meanwhile, to believe that climate change is a hoax, you have to filter this through 17 consultants, all of whom are making a lot of money to lie as they disseminate this through politicians and newspapers. And, maybe that reaches a lot of people, and maybe those people have their minds changed. But I don't think that what we're describing right here is a fundamental problem with democracy. You know what I think is a non-fundamental extrinsic problem to democracy? When you have a democracy and then you give an enormous amount of political and media power to a small group of people who have entirely separate interests to the majority of the population. I think that imposes a problem on democracy. I don't think that democracy just necessarily leads to people electing sociopaths and lunatics. I think that that takes outside influence. The best example is always Mitch McConnell, who has to spend $10,000 for every dollar an opponent spends to keep his seat. Is that true? Jesus.
What if we ran companies that way? Because companies aren't democracies. They're totalitarian.
So how do you run a company? So first of all, usually how are companies made? Usually,
Are you saying like an entrepreneur starts a small business?
like
or something?
Apple. Let's just take Apple or Google.
Right.
It's made by a few enterprising people. So yada yada yada. It's made by 3-4 people. Apple, and over the years, it's growing. And so, how do you run Apple?
At what point does it become like subject to public opinion on who's going to run it and stuff like that? At what point does it get big enough to make those decisions?
And that's something that...
That's a policy decision. You can 8 people, 10 people when you put the line. I mean, yeah, whatever. It's not like a necessarily objectively correct line there.
See, that's why I asked the question about how do you feel about elected
because like an
government.
independent artist is also running a business and could be making a lot of money depending. There's a wide range. So how do we what do we define as?
Businesses aren't government.
No, they're not.
They're small governments. They are. Like, objectively, they are. They don't have as much control as the government. But on a day-to-day basis, a person's individual, like an individual human's life is probably affected by their workplace decisions a lot more than their actual government decisions, A person can go years without feeling the effect government policy, just this big invisible, someone over in DC is doing stuff, Sure, they walk down roads and I mean they feel the effects of government policy all the time, but in terms of active impact on their day, not so frequent. But they go to work and that's a day-by-day thing,
Part of like the freedom we enjoy.
But I agree that like a company like Google is almost like government.
Yeah, we're
that's a whole different aspect of regulating these like monster businesses.
Right, and oftentimes, when there are critical parts of society that we deem like off limits to the private sector, we're like, let's say like the military. We don't, the government has a monopoly on that, right? Monopoly on like keeping an armed force and everything.
Yeah.
And at least in theory, I mean, obviously there's a whole different conversation, but in the United States, we have some say over what our military does as a result of that, right? Because we elect the people, we elect the commander in chief, we elect who's in charge, and we elect the person who is able to control the armed forces, right?
I mean, theoretically, the armed forces should be controlled by Congress, which hasn't really ever been taking place recently.
You're right. Yeah, according to the Constitution.
But you're saying, what are you saying? Just, you know what I mean?
I'm just saying that we can agree that there are certain things in society that we have decided that it's best if this is not left up to the entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Yes. Government should be in charge of stuff that has great social
Right. And so some people might think that the work that people are required to do to live in our society is also something essential and should be controlled more democratically in the same way that we control government institutions.
How?
Like what?
The same. I mean, what do you mean? How there are public institutions, right?
So electricity isn't invented by one dude who's just like, I have this great idea, I'm going to make a company.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The internet isn't owned by one dude. You know what I mean? Water isn't owned by one dude.
I'm not sure what the discussion is right now. I don't know what the point being made is.
Just by the definition of utility.
It belongs to the common.
How are you going to go to a guy who founded Google and say, how do we make the government? We're taking it for the government. So what does that mean? What does that mean?
Okay, well, I mean...
So again, I don't advocate for this all to be taken by the government. Decommodification often means government control, but not always. There are ways to decommodify something, but not have it just be like government run. There's variety there. I tend to advocate for worker cooperatives.
So I feel like there's two tracks here, because there's how do we like you're now asking like how, because we're in deep, right? There's a sunk cost here. We've built a society the way that we are, and ripping that all out is going to be a very disruptive process. So you're right. Like what, if the government tomorrow were to nationalize all of Silicon Valley and just say, yeah, these are all publicly owned and take it all away, obviously people wouldn't go quietly with that, especially the people that own Google. They wouldn't like that, right? And so, I mean, that's something that has happened in history a lot when socialist revolutions happen, when the revolution happens and it's like, okay, we're going to nationalize all the oil industry. Like that all just belongs to the government now. You don't get to own that as a private citizen anymore. And so where is that line? What is essential to society?
But
what
oil,
is it?
again, oil, you're talking about a natural resource. I'm talking about like a big company.
Sure.
They invented their own product and sell it. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with the rules that govern that come from, the people, from the concepts of guardrails, high level, that they have to treat their employees with a certain level of, they have to compensate them to a certain
we're
level
coming
to
back to
provide.
that social democrat.
So like,
and listen,
so I don't
got a
think
problem with what you're describing, really. Like, I agree. I mean, and
I don't think putting the government in charge is going to improve anything. If you were talking about like massive businesses like, Google, again, just to use an Apple, you're talking about natural resources that benefit all people that need them. Then that's it. Then, but listen, I'm open to having a debate about these things. I'm not saying one way or the other.
Conversation about it. I just think that, I think it comes down to, again, where that line is drawn. And it's like internet stuff, for example. You're right. I mean, especially in the early days when it's just little companies figuring it out. But then at a certain point, when does the internet become a human right? When does living in society?
I don't like the context in which this discussion is being had, because I think it's so much more effective to talk about either the right to democracy as a fundamental value, like you wouldn't want any system to gain a huge amount of power and influence while being undemocratically controlled. Or you could talk about like the broader harm the existence of the bourgeoisie as a class do. Like there are a lot of directions you can take this. I don't like the constant conflation between socialism and the government taking control of stuff. I don't like that.
Does the internet become a requirement, and does it become fucked up to deny people that because they can't afford it?
Sure.
No, I agree with that stuff.
And so it starts to get kind of gray, right?
Well, I'm looking at this nuance. I'm not saying we need to have conversations about stuff as it happens, and we need to have it from like a benevolent point of view and a realistic point of view. I'm not saying, I'm open to having a conversation about socializing anything, right? But that's what it should be. It should be a conversation and about like the social good that something can have. And if it needs to be, is it being, is this business being owned privately to a great detriment to the majority of people? Are people not having access to it who need it? And this is a conversation to have on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, and so you're an incrementalist, and you think.
And so far, like we're talking about the really big companies, which we all agree on that, like Google, Facebook, all the scary stuff. I agree, 100%. But like, what about the in-between? What about everything else, like under that?
But but again, I'm talking about like regulations. I'm talking about like antitrust shit. I'm not talking about full government takeovers of the company.
Okay, right. But it doesn't, the full government takeover of the company is the extreme end of that. But like the middle ground of what I'm talking about is unions. That's what unions are, right?
Well, we're not even going to mention co-ops. I feel like this is really important because workers controlling the means of production is literally the whole socialism thing. It's very, very important. It would be very weird for the government to just randomly decide that it's going to like nationalize Google. It's an odd decision for them to make. But if they were to pass laws concerning like the democratization of workplaces, that could be applied a lot more fairly and evenly, and it would answer a lot of the questions here concerning like, well, at what point do you implement these rules, and why are we doing this at all? Actually, see, Ethan is still asking, what social good would you derive from nationalizing these companies? But you're not nationalizing Apple. I don't want to nationalize Apple. I want it to be collectively controlled by the workers. And who would that benefit? The workers at Apple. There you go. Simple as. He's already said stuff that's gone unaddressed. Ethan has already said he doesn't think that government takeovers would make things better for the workers.
Pro-union. I think unions are great, and I think workers should have power.
And so all a union really is in a sense, it's somewhat democratizing a workplace, because now the union gets a say in how the business is conducted. Hey, the workers, we're all getting together and we're saying, unless you improve this, unless you do this, we're not showing up, and we're going to
This is a
prevent anybody.
negotiation. This is a conversation. You know what I mean? It's not
Right,
like
well,
it's not a government interjecting and telling a business what they can and can't do.
Well, in a
Them being stuck in the tanky frame of, quote, government owns the thing equals communism has led to a complete stance. Yeah, like really. And I think it shows like the ideological weakness of government control as a means of achieving socialism, where it's just like, why? Corporations are corrupt. The government's corrupt. They both treat people bad. We already have stuff that's controlled by the government that works bad. Why? You know, like it totally misses the fundamentals.
sense, it is because government gives protections to unions. We at one point decided that these are important, and we created a structure where we
I'm in
said,
favor of that.
right, because
I am
prior to
too.
that, the owners of the factory or whatever, when the workers tried to do something like that, they literally fucking shoot them.
Right. So yeah,
You know
that's
what I mean?
Not okay.
That
I'm in-
happened.
Okay,
I
but I'm
think
in
that's
favor
okay.
of unions.
Okay, well,
And by the
I'm
way,
glad to
if
hear
you
that,
look
but
at again, what you look at Scandinavia, which I think is like as close to a model
they have
society,
very high, very,
they have
very high
tons of
union
unions,
participation rate, right? Yeah,
right?
like extremely high.
And probably tons of laws protecting unions.
Mhm.
And so again, I'm looking at social democracy like in Scandinavia and saying this is a model society and it's as close as we're going to get as an equitable
I'm trying
society
to, like-
realistically too.
Yeah.
I think that's a very bad thing to say. I think it's very arrogant to look at the way things are now and to go like, yeah, we've basically reached it. We've basically reached the end. You know, like, yeah. Well, people have always said that. Like, always people have said that, you know? Yeah, it's like everyone thinks they're at the end of history when they lack the political education to perceive what might be improved upon.
I'm trying to understand what is the point we don't agree on.
Well, I just think.
Well, here's what
I
we're
don't think we're
disagreeing
that
on.
far apart from each other.
You saying anti-capitalism. Are you opposed to the idea of capitalism? Because I agree that capitalism in its current form is unsustainable.
I would say
What
that.
flaws do Scandinavian countries have, Vosh? I would love to do like an hour-long angry rant on that and then get my subreddit really mad and then ban a bunch of them. You go watch any video that I've put out before where I talk about social democracy.
That I am opposed to it, but I would say I am far less radical than many that think that we should tear it down immediately. I think that the ripple effect of that would inevitably be extremely violent and disruptive to society. And I'm more of the incrementalist. Now, I would say I am for the left of you because I think that the end goal should be a little bit further in that direction than what you're saying. But
In what way?
Which is
we're,
why I
talk-
just
we're
wanna
talking in
understand.
degrees
In what
here.
way? Yeah.
Like what?
In what way are you? First of all, the saying like capitalism shouldn't exist is like, I feel a fairy tale. It's just not a realistic expectation for humans to. I just
Or like
don't.
for me, it's like define what would that look like. I just want to like get to an understanding where
Okay,
we
how about in,
understand
like, really
each other.
simple terms, I think that, you know, an incrementally pushed left society that's moving away from capitalism a little bit would likely have companies use profit sharing models with their employees on a much bigger basis. And you see some companies doing that.
No. It has to be ownership, not profit sharing. Profit sharing on its own is almost tangential. The whole point is the abolition of the bourgeoisie. You can't do that. You gotta hit on the specific ideological points. It just I don't know. It just reminds me a little bit of like the vagueness that I heard from a lot of like, I don't know, Bernie-crats, where it's like, well, we need something different. We need a different system. And then you say, well, what's this? And they're like, you know, so something different.
But if you study it over time, what has happened is the opposite of that, is that the profits of companies are getting concentrated more and more up
Well, we're just talking about regulating and stuff again.
See, yeah, again, you can't challenge Ethan's position if your only problems with capitalism are regulatory. That's it. You're going to keep running into that because, you know, Ethan's correct. You can regulate your way out of that. The real question is, why doesn't that ever actually happen? We could theoretically get, you know, a welfare state, free education, and the like under a monarchy. Like, there's nothing that prevents a monarch from doing those things. Nothing at all. So why do monarchs tend to enrich themselves at the expense of their people and do very little to benefit the average citizen? Well, there's something about the material conditions and the class incentives of a monarch makes them disinclined to engage in that behavior. And there's something about the bourgeoisie, the most powerful people in our society, that disinclines them to allow us to regulate them.
Right. So I would say that one thing that you could do is you could regulate it that you, as an owner and a CEO of a company, the profits that the company is generating, you're obligated to share that with the people that work for you on a much bigger scale.
It's just a matter of
Rather than
how
right
fairly.
now, which the goal always is to pay your workers as little as possible. That is, and that's not like a
and
secret.
that's
or
human
nefarious.
nature, bro. That's why we need to
Oh God. It's all come tumbling down, tumbling down, tumbling down.
adjust where that bar is. We need to agree that that bar, because listen, it's only
and again,
natural.
that's why I'm saying
for
we're not that far away.
Big,
We're talking in degrees of how far you move the bar.
I
I'd
just-
probably move it further than you, but I'm not. I don't own a company like.
but yeah, I mean, listen, if you're just debating on like how much to compensate your employees fairly, that's like
Stop asking me to speak to Ethan. If you want me to speak to Ethan, ask Ethan in his chat. Be annoying in his chat if you want to be. You can do that if you want. Though don't be annoying, preferably. Don't ask me. Ask him. I would go on. It's up to him.
And we're talking about first steps
to
here.
be like,
too.
yo,
I mean,
I think every company should give X amount of profits to employees.
Do not super chat $1,000.
It's also overly complicated because in the sense it's like, what if you don't have a profitable year? Then the employees make less? Also fudge the numbers. How many businesses fudge?
In a worker cooperative, if the business did poorly enough that they couldn't pay out full wages to everyone, then yes, everyone would make less. But in our system currently, when that happens, people get laid off anyway, so...
Fudge their numbers.
but what you just described happens all the time.
Okay,
People
but
get
I'm not
fired,
talking
they get
about
laid
what
off,
happens.
or they get wage cuts.
What happens is not good. What is happening is not good. We both agree.
Yeah, no, I think, obviously we both agree on that. Yeah, 100%. You said what's happening
What's
now?
happening now is not good.
Yeah.
But okay. I think
What's happening now is the heavily incentivized end product of the systems that we've built. We aren't at the current state of affairs because we just accidentally wandered here to record corporate profits and inequality. We arrived at this point because it's like going to a gambling hall and finding out that a machine is rigged because you look at it really close and you see that what appeared to be a flat surface is actually slightly tilted. You can put a marble on it and it starts rolling towards the center. The rolling towards the center in this system is the bourgeois class interest. It really like sort of bothers me that people think of Marxism as like super complicated and academic because genuinely like the basis of Marxist critical theory is almost that simple, right? The reason these things keep happening, despite the fact that it's bad for basically everyone, is because we've given a fuck ton of power to people with a different set of interests.
I think
I feel
having a
like-
bare minimum bar of what we provide, basic human rights to people, like FDR was carving out, is a better system, personally, and a simpler system, and a more realistic system.
I feel like the conversations of like how far to go are like, I'd be willing to have them, but I feel like first I just want to see like normal shit happening. You know what I mean? Like
That's the thing is like, that's why again,
'Cause
like,
that's almost like
I have like my
Fantasyland.
personal beliefs of like idealism of like how I would love to see the world work with like rainbows and everything, and then I have the other side of like, okay, we live in the real world, what can happen or whatever, and so those are different conversations, and so
I think it's somewhat telling and somewhat troubling that there would be a difference between those things. Like, you have your idealistic what you want, and then you have what we can actually do. I guess in my mind they're the same. Like, I don't really think in my head like I wish I lived in a post-communist, anarchist, whatever. These are general ideas to describe something farther off, but I try to keep my material analysis kind of grounded in the current circumstances. Like when I think of what I want, like what I want, I try to think of how it can be framed in this context. And we got to keep our eye on the prize, man, with the end of the bourgeoisie.
So yeah, I mean, for now, I would, public health care would be great.
I don't have an issue with Dan, by the way. I know that I've been. It's mostly just like I wish I could have explained this if I was there. That's my feeling. So if I come across as overly critical to Dan, it's because I'm thinking like, well, of course, if I was there, I would have logically debated Ethan into being a mutualist in simply 5 seconds. I just don't want him to come across the bad opinion on the whole topic.
Like that's the thing is, in my opinion, we're in such a bad spot that like, I'll take just getting Medicare for all. Like that would be a huge W, sure. And that's in my opinion not far enough, but I'll take it.
We're not getting
no
it
to
either.
that,
We're not
right?
getting that.
People think
Feel me?
that, I don't know. Listen, people think it's being pessimist to say it's human nature to be greedy. Show me one time in a big organized society where that wasn't the inevitability of like deep-seated societal destroying corruption.
But do you want to live in a society that encouraged that? Or
Do I want to
that-
live in a
that
perfect
checks it?
utopia? Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I'm not saying perfect utopia.
It's
I'm
a matter
saying
of whether it encourages it. It's a matter of whether or not the incentive structures appropriately channel those feelings and behaviors.
quite a few people that run our country, and I'm not saying you feel this way because this isn't your opinion, but this is the prevailing attitude in this country, is that it's a good thing to arrange the way we run society around. Let's embrace that greed. Let's use it for good, like you said.
Also, I honestly, I just don't like the term greed. I like the term self-interest. People pursue their perceived self-interest. Like, that is what they do. People's self-interests can be met in a variety of ways, and there can be ways to socially condition what like self-interest people are pursuing.
Rather than, hey, this is a fundamental part of human nature, we should check it.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
Well,
right?
it's to me not that big of a difference. It's
I
the
think
same
it's
thing.
I think there's a fundamental difference there.
I'm not saying like there are people who are going to be extremely innovative and effective that are going to be motivated by wanting to be really rich and
By
really
getting money.
powerful.
Yeah, I mean,
Elon Musk is a good example.
He's certainly not the example I would go to if I was trying to demonstrate the value of entrepreneurship and self-interest in a capitalist system. What he said, by the way, is just wrong. I don't think there's any reason to believe that the belief that you might achieve great wealth is a necessary incentive and motivator to people doing cool innovations. I just don't believe that's true. So many of our innovations on a technological and social level are done by just regular workaday Joes. And if you want to go with the Elon Musk example, Elon has never invented a single thing in his entire life. He pays engineers to invent, and they're not making billions of dollars off what they produce. If anything, this is an argument in favor of worker-controlled corporations, because the people who actually do the innovation are almost always employees. You know, companies are very rarely run by coders or engineers. They're usually hired by companies. Maybe there'd be more of an incentive for them to produce if they shared in the company.
The guy's a fucking psycho piece of shit. I hate him on a level, but like what he's achieved with Tesla is undeniable in terms of moving EV to mainstream.
So this is another like capitalist realism thing, right? Attributing to Elon what? So I'm not getting into this.
It just is undeniable, right?
Uh-huh.
And I don't even want to give him the credit because I fucking hate him. Think he sucks. But like, say
You don't have to give him the credit. He hasn't done anything. He didn't make the car. Like, if the innovation we're referring to here, Elon needed $200 billion as a necessary motivator for him to be a lay epic Reddit guy who would promote EVs for a couple years before grifting into being a Republican and no longer talking about EVs anymore.
saying like making this, distinction between promoting greed or putting guardrails to prevent from greed.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, there's not a significant difference there, in my opinion. Unless you can explain. By the way, people were saying this is worse than Dead Air. The show's over, right? I mean, it's been over. Just leave if you don't
wow.
like
What time is it?
It's past
after
5.
It's after
dude.
5.
This is
Yeah,
just-
we got caught up.
We gotta go.
You gave yourself no green flag for not wanting to talk about politics, and then you just launched into an hour-long diatribe about socialism versus capitalism. So, liar.
I think it's interesting.
I think social democracy is the way to go. It's just realistic, man. And I'm pro-union, and I think people should be fairly compensated. I think people are entitled to
Right.
own a home. I think people are entitled to
and I
go to
would say
college.
this-
I think people are entitled to, have healthy meals.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that I don't think that we should regulate how rich people can be if they're existing in that sandbox. Like I'm not going to come out here and say billionaires shouldn't exist, because if you can become a billionaire in this sandbox where you're paying your fair share to provide for people in this way, making sure you live in a society where people get houses, where people get food, where people get education, if you can do all that and still be a billionaire, then there's no problem with that, in my opinion. There's just
This is one of those things where all the preconditions move the goalpost past a point. Like, you can never be a billionaire and pay your fair share because you have billions. In order for you to be a billionaire and still have paid your fair share to the people who worked with you to that point, you would have had to have otherwise been a quadrillionaire in like a capitalist system. There's no system, like, there's no system in which a person could accumulate that much wealth while getting their fair share. Like for Elon, right? 200 billion for what? Tesla? He hasn't done the work. The people who work at Tesla have done the work. And even then, the wealth is almost entirely in market over evaluation. It's not actually like for the things he's produced, evaluated higher than any American car company in spite of selling fewer cars than them. Percentage-wise, what's a fair share? I don't think the bourgeoisie should exist. Elon Musk should own the company just as much as every other person who works there. If Elon Musk wants to maintain his position as CEO of Tesla, what they can do is elect him to that position, and none of them will. There is no world where Elon Musk is CEO under socialism because no one would elect him.
Well,
you know what
we've
I
had
mean?
this discussion before, but I think it just comes down to whether or not you believe you can get to that level without doing horrible shit.
Doing horrible shit?
It's not just about doing horrible shit. It's about the class dynamics.
You mean like, can you?
Is that even an
I think
attainable
so.
thing without
Well,
being an immoral person?
There's billionaire has become a huge range. You know, look at people on the top. They're worth 200, 300 billion.
Yeah, Elon Musk billionaire is
sick.
like a lot more than a 1 billionaire.
Can you become that rich without doing horrible things? Definitely not. Can you get $1 billion without doing horrible things? Probably.
The goalposts keep shifting where it's like, okay, well, you could have 1 million and it's ethical. Okay, well, you can have 10 million and it's ethical. And now it's like, oh, well, yeah, he's a billionaire, but he's like a small billionaire, you know? By the time I'm an old man, it's going to be like, okay, look, he has a few trillion. Let's not pretend that's anything like Elon, Musk Jr.
Well, billionaire shouldn't exist as a snappy slogan. Maybe you can quibble about where the line of acceptability is, but I think you understand in principle that at a certain point that...
Oh, and remember that the wealth of billionaires is underestimated because almost all of them absolutely have illegally held money in offshore islands. Remember, Panama Papers, over $10 trillion held overseas. A lot of that is held just by individual oligarchs who want to keep their money safe from taxation, just keep it in a little bucket somewhere. We're talking about an amount of money which exceeds like the entire U.S. discretionary federal budget 10 times over.
That level of wealth, concentrated wealth.
In my model society, I don't think people...
I hate the argument like for capitalists where it's like, well, people are going to be greedy. It's like, hey, people are going to be greedy no matter what. So here's my solution to deal with greedy people, okay? We're going to create a system where they can accrue an infinite amount of power, and then we're going to also give them the ability to influence the governments that would otherwise regulate their power, all right? That's my solution to greed being a thing in humanity is, okay, what if we just capitulate all power?
People could become that rich.
What about like Taylor Swift worth $740 million?
She's just an entertainer. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. But when you say billionaires shouldn't exist, I think it's about time we start making a distinction between like 100 billionaires and like, single digit billionaires.
I will not. I'm not going to.
Because there is a big difference, you know what I mean? There is.
You don't
Like
think
a
it's
lot
a
of
little silly to
musicians.
quibble over that? Because again,
Not really.
it's a political slogan at the end of the day, and I feel like it gets the
Well,
point across
I
pretty
think that
easily, right?
I think that it's not self-serving because I think plenty of people see that and they think what I'm seeing and they think that's silly. Why shouldn't people be able to be successful? Because there are people who are way too fucking rich and evil, clearly, who got that rich. It's, I think there's a difference between, like, let's say Elon Musk is 300, how wealthy is Elon? He's like 250 billion or something?
Something like that.
But he's 250 times richer than a 1 billionaire. So let's say you have 10,
obviously he's on the most extreme.
let's say you have $10,000 in the bank.
I feel like we should probably do what statisticians do and eliminate the outliers when we're doing our calculations here, because to pretend that just because there's one guy who has 200 billion, that means that the people with 10 billion or 1 billion aren't also outliers. It's like the grand scale of human wealth distribution, where you have like at the beginning over here you have like the whole human population, and then all the way over here you have like, here's Elon and here's a person with 1 billion. And it's like, oh man, dude, the person with the 1 billion is so much closer to the rest of the world than Elon Musk is. And it's like, okay, what if we eliminated the outlier? So here on the left is all of humanity, and then here's a guy with 1 billion. And we could zoom in on this like 5 million times before we saw any fluctuation. You know what I mean? It's like we're like comparing different infinities. Like, it's like, oh, well, okay, infinity is a lot of money, sure. But did you know that there's a double infinity where if you count the fractions of the thing, I saw that Veritasium video, say, okay, well, they're both pretty big.
Mhm.
So what's that times 250? You know what I mean? Like the difference is
No, that's enough. I've made my point. I've watched enough H3 stuff for now. You know, I hope at some point a coherent iteration of socialist theory is delivered to Ethan Klein. In the meantime, I'm done with this for now.